Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Interpares boardroom. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kath, and I'm on the communications team here at Interpares, and I'm here with Amani Khalfan, the program manager for Sudan here at Interpares. Feel free to say hello, introduce yourself in the comments. You can also drop any questions that you have for Amani there too, and we'll have a bit of time at the end to dig into them. So there's a lot to talk about, so we'll just jump right in. So as you probably know, there's an absolutely brutal war happening in Sudan right now, and it's been happening for more than 2.5 years between the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF or SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. So keep those acronyms in your head because you're going to hear them a lot for the next half hour or so. Civilians aren't just being caught in the crossfire, they're the targets. Estimates are that 150,000 to as many as 500,000 civilians have been killed, and 12 million more forced to flee their homes. There's famine as both sides of the war are blocking humanitarian aid from reaching those who need it. The parties to the conflict are also targeting humanitarian workers. US-based funding cuts have only made the situation bleaker. As many of the organizations that would be helping displaced people have lost a ton of resources this past year. So in short, what's happening in Sudan and around Sudan is the world's worst crisis right now. And, you wouldn't necessarily know it based on the amount of media and political attention it's getting. So Amani, do you want to add anything to help set the context of our conversation?
Yeah, now that you've talked about the war itself, I want to give a little bit of just a little overview of Sudan's social movements and their position in all of this. So in 2019, there was a popular revolution in Sudan, and women and young people were really leaders in that movement. It created the conditions for the fall of the 30-year dictatorship of Omar al-Bashir. So it was very inspiring, and it was organized in large part by the resistance committees. And those are Sudanese grassroots groups that, at the neighborhood level, that organize while resisting affiliation with political parties. So after that, there was a brief period of a lot of hope and relative freedom, and the promise of an alternative to the cycle of military coup after military coup that had defined Sudan's post-independence period. So then a joint military civilian council, transitional government was put in place to supposedly pave the way for a civilian government. And one story that stuck with me for a long time is from Khartoum in 2019. There was a peaceful sit-in by protesters at the military headquarters, and the military and the RSF massacred up to 200 protesters in one day. And Hemeti, who is the leader of the RSF then and now, made a speech saying that if it were up to him, he'd have turned Khartoum into a ghost town. And it seems, looking back, that was his promise of retribution. So in 2019, just before they'd have had to hand over power to civilians, the heads of the SAF and the RSF jointly carried out a military coup and seized power.
Yeah, in 2021.
Yeah, October 2021. But Sudanese people continued to organize these massive mobilizations on the street, calling for, at that point, all armed actors out of the government, so for no compromise and negotiation with them. And during that period, resistance committee networks across Sudan created these proposals for establishing a democratic and secular system that actually serves the people of Sudan. But even after the coup, even after the military sit-in massacre, international actors continued to legitimize these military and militia leaders and to sideline grassroots movements. So those alternatives didn't ever get the uptake that they really deserved. So that brings us to April 2023, the start of the current war. The RSF and the SAF, the two sides of the same coin, they turned on each other, starting in the capital city of Khartoum. It was an all-out war. All of our counterparts based in Khartoum had to flee. And you mentioned earlier at the beginning that in this war, civilians are the targets. And that's absolutely true. Some of our counterparts have told us that this war is not just between two rival militias for power and control over Sudan, but also intended to punish civilians for daring to rebel.
It's, yeah, that's, thanks for giving us that kind of background before the war, because there was a real period, like it was a period of hope and, yeah.
And transformation.
Yeah. Is there, I guess that brings us to today. Is there anything that you want to add about the current situation?
Yeah, so since the beginning of the war, for over 2 years, the international media and community has basically ignored what's happening, even though it's an unprecedented type of crisis globally, in terms of the scale, the use of food as a weapon of war. A quarter of the whole population of the country has been displaced, and half of the population faces acute hunger. So it's clear that both warring parties have committed atrocities, and neither of them has legitimacy. And those atrocities on both sides include weaponizing food aid, engineering famine by obstructing humanitarian actors and targeting them, actually. So international aid agencies have very limited access to conflict zones. So in reality, it's Sudanese civilians through what are called emergency response rooms, which mostly come from the resistance committees. And they're doing most of the essential work to keep people alive under very, very tough conditions with very few resources, providing food, providing medical aid. And a lot of people have only been able to survive these past 2.5 years because of these community kitchens, providing maybe 1 meal a day.
Okay. Yeah, so I mentioned before that we're really not hearing a lot about this in the media. There's not a lot of political attention. But something people might have seen over the last month or so, I guess, is that the Darfur region and particularly the city of El Fasher have been in the news. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. It's a tough discussion, so people listening maybe take care of yourselves a little bit. So the city of El Fasher was under siege by the RSF for 18 months, and also really important because it was the last place in Darfur not under the direct control of the RSF. It's the capital of North Darfur State. And by under siege, I mean that the RSF encircled the entire city with a wall and didn't allow any food in, no medicine, and people smuggling in those items would face execution if they were caught. So civilians were under constant bombardment and drone attacks, just like terrifying to read about. And for many months now, people have been warning the international communities of massacres that would happen if the RSF took control of El Fasher. So we saw at the end of October, I think October 26th, El Fasher fell to the RSF, and those warnings came true. There are really horrific stories that we've seen. Despite the communications blackout, there's satellite images from the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab showing essentially pools of blood, evidence of these mass atrocities. A lot of the evidence we have actually comes from RSF fighters themselves posting videos to social media because of complete impunity and expectation of impunity. So RSF fighters posted videos of themselves systematically executing civilians who were taking shelter in a hospital, chasing down and killing people trying to flee. So aid groups are waiting in places where they are allowed to operate. So in Tawila, which is a town actually 60 kilometers from El Fasher, expecting large numbers of people to show up, only a few thousand people showed up, right? So there could be up to 150,000 people who are still trapped or their fate is unknown right now. and some survivors are so traumatized that they cannot speak or remember their own names. So, there are fears that there are other cities nearby in Kordofan where people are also trapped and experiencing famine. So, it's a really, it's a very tough situation right now. So after the fall of El Fasher, politically, the RSF controls most of Western Sudan, the SAF controls most of the rest of the country, and the RSF has formed a parallel rival governments, and they're working hard, as they have for a few years, to sort of gain recognition as a legitimate governing entity. So there's the real possibility of the country splitting in two.
Okay. The mention of Darfur and the atrocities that are happening there right now might bring back memories of about 2 decades ago, and the genocide that happened there in around 2003. Does what's happening right now have anything to do with that? What happened in the past there?
Yeah. It's a direct continuation of what was happening in 2003, and I think a lot of people do remember that first Darfur genocide by the Janjaweed in the early 2000s, because there was a lot of international attention and solidarity. But the tactics that the Janjaweed used then are the same that they use now. Like, remember that the Janjaweed essentially morphed into the Rapid Support Forces.
Right.
But a lot of the tactics they use are the same. So kidnapping, sexual violence, ethnic cleansing against non-Arab populations. But this time there's relatively little attention. There has been relatively little attention. So right now, after the massacres in El Fasher, it seems like the international community and media is finally paying attention. So we're asking people, when the media stops reporting on it, as they do, continue paying attention to Sudan.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have Interpares has 3 counterpart organizations, 3 partner local Sudanese organizations that we work with, and you're in communication with them. You hear from them all the time. Can you tell us a little bit about what they've been telling you and what they're going through right now?
Yeah. So just to give a bit of context, we've worked with, Interpares has worked with local feminist organizations in Sudan for about 20 years. And we accompany them in various ways, so that includes long-term stable funding, as well as advocacy here in Canada. Before the coup, one of our counterparts was working, among other things, to challenge laws that oppressed women, like the public order law and the family law. We also work with a network of young activists and an LGBTQ organization, all really impressive, amazing organizations. The majority of them were based in Khartoum and had to escape when the war broke out, and mostly lost everything. So all of their assets, their offices, everything. All of them went through the personal experience of displacement, some of them several times. And so for a while they were focused on survival. Many Sudanese organizations have disappeared since the start of the war, as you can imagine. But thankfully, all 3 of our counterparts have been able to reestablish themselves in Sudan and outside Sudan.
Okay. And, like you said, they're not humanitarian organizations normally.
Yeah.
But they've all each had to completely pivot the way that they work at the outbreak of the war and since. So what is it that they're doing today?
So right now, the focus, as you said, has to be on the most urgent humanitarian needs, because these are enormous. So one of our counterparts is doing what I call feminist emergency response work. So they're providing food, water, menstrual kits, psychosocial support, and farming inputs for displaced people, especially in Eastern Sudan, and also in refugee camps across the borders. The other counterparts are continuing to support the organization of youth activists who are displaced, and supporting and advocating for the Sudanese queer community. So they're really carrying the dreams and aspirations of generations of Sudanese activists before them, working for liberation. They're doing the best they can, but they've told us that the war will, from their perspective, the war will not end because there's complete impunity for these crimes right now. Nobody's trying to hold them to account, and all of the negotiations and ceasefires so far have failed.
Right. So one thing that I know that they've emphasized quite a bit, and that you touched on just now, the impunity for the crimes. Something that our counterparts are emphasizing, we're trying to emphasize to the public, that this war is really being fueled by external actors. Other countries are like, keeping things awful. Can you give us a bit of detail on that?
Yeah. So Sudan is very strategically important for the region and also for some international actors. So in terms of its mineral resources, it has a lot of gold and other minerals and massive amounts of agricultural land, as well as access to port locations on the Red Sea. So it's a very important shipping channel. There are many countries with a stake in the war. So for the RSF, the United Arab Emirates is their main backer, and Sudan is central to their strategy in the Horn of Africa. So this is well known and well supported. The SAF is supported politically and militarily by Egypt, Turkey, and other states, including Iran, as well as the former Sudanese regime or elements of it. So our counterparts and partners have told us that Sudan's warring parties are able to insulate themselves from any accountability or pressure, except from their external backers. They've said it's beyond the ability of local actors on the ground to intervene, and it requires diplomatic level and minister-to-minister level engagement, and that includes from Canada. So we're going to share, I think, in the chat after. Yeah, so it's a summary of the main things that our partners have told us just very recently about what's happening and what the international community needs to do from their perspective, just like very practical things. So I think you'll see that. You can read it later.
Yeah. So I guess kind of what you're saying is, like, to pressure the RSF, for example, you would have to pressure the UAE. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we've done a few chats now about how U.S.-based funding cuts have hurt our counterparts and very suddenly stripped a lot of organizations of really core funding. Have our Sudanese counterparts had to deal with this as well?
Some of them have been affected, and one of them lost almost all its funding suddenly. And you can imagine how that impacts people's lives, their ability to provide like really important services. And also the majority of the community kitchens across Sudan also lost their funding then. Okay. So it's really devastating. And it's not just the US, it's part of a sort of a broader trend of Western countries cutting their foreign aid budgets and really deprioritizing human rights, deprioritizing international development, sometimes in favor of military spending. This year in Canada, the Liberal Party ran on an election platform that included big promises about leadership on the international stage, about rule of law and human rights. But so far we haven't seen that. Just recently we've seen a plan to shrink Canada's foreign aid by 15%. That's the plan. So for our Sudanese counterparts, we're able to support them with funds that mostly come from individuals, individual donors and some allied foundations and unions, but we can't completely fill the gaps that have been created.
No, because I mean those gaps are massive.
Yep.
Yeah, and we're So what has the government, like the Canadian government's response been in the past 2.5 years since the war started?
So, since the war started, Canada has basically withdrawn from Sudan. I mean, politically, diplomatically, they've been more or less absent and silent. Canada's been criticized as being complicit in an international conspiracy of silence about the war in Sudan, not just by neglecting it, but by also failing to name and put pressure on the external supporters who are enabling this war. There've also been very limited immigration measures that have been called racist because of how restrictive they are, shockingly so.
Is there anything that has been, that the Canadian government has done that has been in any way positive since the war began?
Yeah, so Canada is a significant source of the humanitarian funding for Sudan, which, it's only funded to about 20-something% of what's needed, but Canada is there. And Canada's had an arms embargo on Sudan since 2004. This is a good thing. The UN Security Council embargo that currently applies only to the region of Darfur, which is in many ways meaningless because it's not enforced, and there are massive supply chains of weapons just pouring into the country. And research has been done to establish where these weapons are coming from. And they originate in China, the UAE, Russia, Turkey, Serbia, and even Canada. Folks watching might have seen reports lately in the Canadian news that Canadian-made weapons have been found in the hands of the RSF. So what we do know is that Canada exports about $7 million worth of military equipment to the UAE every year, and it's possible that that's the source.
Right. Jeez. So, I mean, clearly, what Canada has done so far is not enough. It's we really can, and we really have to do a lot more. Can you tell us what we're advocating for, and what a lot of Canadian civil society is advocating that the Canadian government do?
All of Canada's civil society, diaspora activist groups are advocating that Canada really needs to give this the urgent priority it requires and that it deserves. So again, our partners have told us that nothing will really change in the trajectory of this war unless pressure is put on those external backers, and most urgently now on the UAE. So we have two things we're advocating for. One is Canada and other states have leverage over external actors through trade and other direct relationships, and they should be making Sudan part of all of those engagements. But unfortunately, sorry to take it on a sidetrack, we've seen right now Canada's government is focused on building economic ties with the UAE. So last month, Prime Minister Carney went for the first official visit by a Canadian Prime Minister to the UAE in 40 years. And what he did there was to sign an investment protection deal and to set the stage for a full trade and economic partnership between the Emirates and Canada. And this year, Canada has persisted in its official statements in praising the UAE for its role in humanitarian assistance and mediation. So this happened again last week, and it's shocking and disappointing that this is happening. A lot of groups have called for a cultural boycott of the UAE because of their role in the war. And some of the UAE's massive wealth is built on what is essentially conflict gold. Most of Sudan's gold exports, those are official exports, but mostly smuggled gold, ends up in the Emirates' gold markets. And there's plenty of research showing that Sudan's conflict economy depends very heavily on mining, which is used as an alternative form of payment for military assistance. So, the external backers of the war are doing this because of their economic and strategic interests.
Right.
And if Canada avoids calling out the UAE because of its economic and strategic interests, then, that's really telling.
Yeah. and there's I mean, it's like human rights or investment. Like,
Yeah.
it's the choice. It's clear which way the government is leaning right now, right? Yeah. And then there's a second thing I think that that we've been calling for.
Yeah, so the second thing we're calling for is for the Canadian government to appoint a special envoy for Sudan. This has been done in the past with some success in Canada. So this would be someone with the expertise and who has resources they need to be the focal point for Canada's engagement. Because, as I said, we've basically withdrawn. There isn't even a Sudanese, not even a Canadian ambassador to Sudan anymore. Right. So this would be an envoy, not to engage directly in the negotiations, but to coordinate Canada's response, to liaise with civil society, the diaspora, and guide the government with recommendations, and also ensure transparency and consistency in their approach to Sudan. Okay. And a lot of groups have been advocating for this point too.
Yeah. So we've talked about a lot, and it's very heavy, and people might be feeling a little at a loss for what they can do to help. But there are things, and individuals can take actions. And can you tell us what those actions could be that they could do, like right now?
Several.
Okay.
Yeah, so we want people to tell the government of Canada that they must do more. And we've made it very easy for you to send Kath has made it very easy for you to send a letter to the Canadian government, to the Foreign Affairs Minister, asking them to take those two actions, to appoint an envoy for Sudan, and to call on the UAE to stop aiding and abetting a genocide. So you can find the link to the letter in our chat, sign it and share it with people, and that makes a big impact. I'd also say continue to pay attention after the media attention wanes. Bear witness to what's happening. Follow Sudanese journalists and creators, and talk to people about around you about Sudan. You can also donate to Into Paris to support our 3 Sudanese counterparts. As I mentioned, we don't access government funding for this work, so our support to these Sudanese counterparts is mostly via individuals and allies.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just...
Sorry.
Sorry.
I also want to mention the Sudan Solidarity Collective.
Yeah.
They are a collective that's based in Canada, and they support mutual aid groups across Sudan. That includes the emergency response rooms that I mentioned earlier. They do great work, so check them out and support them. SudanSolidarity.com is their website. Very easy to remember.
We'll put the link in the chat in a minute or two, so you'll be able to find it there too. And just on the donating to Inter Pares, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that tomorrow is Giving Tuesday, but our Giving Tuesday campaign has already started. It's focused all on Sudan and our Sudanese counterparts. There's a very generous one individual donor who will be matching every donation made for Giving Tuesday before tomorrow at midnight. So incredible generosity of that person. They'll match it up to our goal of $10,000. And the link to that is also in the chat. So if you click through, you'll see we've highlighted a couple of the activists that we work with, and there's you should read about them. They're just the level of commitment and through the adversity that they're facing is it's incredible. So I really encourage you to just read about them. And then I think there was one more thing that you wanted to talk about that people can do if they have they have some capacity.
Yeah. So if you have energy and expertise to contribute, we are part of the Canadian Civil Society Working Group on Sudan. It's a coalition of NGOs, students, individual activists, a lot of people with a shared analysis of the situation. And the goal is to do collective advocacy. So Interpares co-chairs that group, and if people want to get involved, you can get in touch with me, and I think we can put my email address in the chat.
Yeah.
After.
So yeah, there are plenty of things people can do to get involved. And let me just take a look at the chat to see if we've gotten any questions. Bear with me. I don't know. Okay, here we go. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So there are a lot of questions. Let's start.
Hi, Jamila.
Thank you for highlighting. Okay, that's great. Hi, Thelma. Hi, Fernand.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, Bill. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And Sama.
Hello. Okay, so it looks like we have a question from Rosella. Hi, Rosella. Thanks for joining us today. So the question is, Canada is now shying away from explicit reference to feminist foreign policy, which raises flags about the level of commitment to global justice and support for feminist organizers on the ground. How is this shift in focus / rhetoric impacting your advocacy efforts? That's a great question.
That's a really profound question. I think it's something that we are, Rosella, you mentioned that this has just happened recently, that it's becoming clear that Canada is no longer claiming to, even though they didn't specifically have a feminist foreign policy before, there was movement towards that. We can't rely on a lot of things anymore. We have a feminist international assistance policy, and that is not necessarily something that we know is going to continue under the current government. So I'd say in terms of our advocacy, we might have taken as a given that prior, when we talked about the impacts of the war in Sudan on women and girls, that this would be something that carries impact because it's happening, right? And so, yeah, it's a very difficult situation. Yeah, that's what I'll say.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think we're still grappling with it for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from Tatiana. So what can we do to help Sudan right now? So if you mentioned a few really concrete things.
Sign the letter.
Yep. And it's super.
Pay attention.
It's super easy. I can't even stress how quick it is to click through the link in the chat, and it's you fill in your name, your email, and it sends an email right to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and it will copy the Prime Minister, it will copy your local MP, and it will copy several ministers whose purview is kind of related.
Trade and defense.
Yeah, exactly.
AI.
Yeah, yes. So yeah, that's key. And sorry, I interrupted you, but you were saying pay attention.
I stopped paying attention. Sign the letter.
Yeah.
Pay attention. Donate to Interpares counterparts or to other groups that are doing amazing work, supporting mutual aid efforts across Sudan.
Okay. Thanks for that question. So Bill has a question. Can you comment on the Canadian government's response to this emergency? Is the Carney government working with other governments to address the conflict, increasing humanitarian aid, developing a special program to enable refugees to come to Canada? So
yeah,
great questions.
Yeah, that's a lot. I think I'll say that humanitarian aid is the only sort of consistent, I'd say piece of real response to the emergency. But again, it's mostly through multilateral actors, and as we found, it's mostly the locally led response organizations that are actually able to access the people who are most affected by the conflict. So, you know, we have been advocating for Canada to direct more of its humanitarian aid directly to local organizations and women's organizations, because they're doing, you know, like they're carrying the brunt of this burden right now.
Right.
On the program to enable refugees to come to Canada, that's a really tough one, because it's not a tough one, it's a very simple one actually, you know. There have been very, very limited, very restrictive immigration measures only for Sudanese people who have direct family in Canada. And there's been so many delays and so many barriers put in place that it's very difficult to access. So there have not been many people who've been able to come to Canada so far. There have been people who've been trying to get their relatives to safety whose family have died in Sudan while waiting. And, you know, the one thing I think it's important to mention is that Canada has shown that it has the capability to actually have very responsive and very generous refugee policies. And that's seen in Canada's refugee policies for Ukraine,
Right.
which eliminated almost all barriers and approved applications extremely quickly.
Right.
You know, so something like 1 million visas were granted to
Wow.
Ukrainians who are affected by war, which is a good thing, and Canada should be doing this for people from all places. And so this is... you know, I mentioned earlier people have called this policy racist,
Yeah.
and this is the explanation.
Totally. I'm looking to see if there are other questions.
Sama has a recommendation about Canada expediting Sudanese applications. Thank you.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you. Let's see. I think that those are the Canada's silence about what happens in Sudan. Shameful. Yeah,
It's true,
It's
Jamila. And Sama reiterates it's important for people to understand that this is not civil war, it's a war against civilians.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I believe we've gotten through the questions that are there, but we will. We'll continue to, if people continue to put questions in after we stop going live, we'll continue to answer, and we'll put all the links that we promised you into the chat, so that you can you can contact Amani if you're able to contribute to the working group, and you can read the briefing from that Amani mentioned earlier in the chat about. It'll give you a real idea of what people are seeing on the ground, and highly recommend looking at that. And yeah, I think that's all. So, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we?
No, but thank you to those folks who tuned in.
Yeah, thank
and
you
the
so
questions.
much.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, really, really great questions from everybody. Thank you so much.
Oh, and a shout out to this artist, Encre Noire, on Instagram. We can maybe drop a link.
Yeah, we can drop a link to her
who
page.
made this beautiful image on our request, and it's handmade in felt. So happy to have that. Yeah, the hibiscus is an important symbol in Sudan.
Yeah. If you can't read it, it says "Liberté pour le Soudan." So, and there's an English version as well. But yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us, and remember to keep paying attention.
Yeah.
Bye.